Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike. Thanks. So I actually have nothing against charities. How many know who Johnny Long is? I hack charities. All right, one person in the back. All right, Johnny Long is a Google hacker guy. He runs a hacker space in Uganda for, it takes Ugandan street kids and teaches them computer skills and information security skills to get them off the street and try to get them educated and actually get them into the workplace instead of being on the street. So he has I Hack Charities, so you guys should definitely check him out, support him. It's good stuff. So I am Mike Saunders, here to talk to you today about detecting and preventing spear phishing attacks using DNS. A little bit about me. I'm currently a pen tester, but it seems like all the talks that I give are blue team talks, and I don't know if that's a guilty conscience or what. But I've been in IT about 17 years or so, been in security the last 9 years, and done a variety of different roles in security. Hardwater Hacker is my Twitter handle, and as you can tell, I'm standing on hard water, so that's where that comes from. Those of you in the frozen north can appreciate. Have a little extra time, so I'm going to tell you about this funny story, right? I'm fragile, I tend to break a lot, and so I'm hiking in the woods with my wife, and I always let her go front because she's vertically challenged and she's got short legs, so I let her set the pace. And we're walking through the woods, we come around this corner, and she just turns around and she walks right past me. Like, I'm thinking, she's an arachnophobe, so I'm thinking there's a big spider hanging across, the trail or whatever. I come around the corner and like 20, 30 feet away from like here to the wall, however far that is, there's a black bear sitting there looking at me. And I'm looking at the bear and the bear's looking at me, and I'm like, oh crap. Like, what do I do? So I pick up a stick. This is not a big stick. This is a little stick. Like, not a branch, not a limb, a stick. It's about that big around, it's about that long. And I grab it and I'm banging off the tree, making noise, and the bear kind of runs away in the bush, but it doesn't seem like it went very far. And so I took this stick and I was like, well, I'm going to scare this, because it ran that direction. There's some bushes there along the trail, and I thought, I'm going to throw this stick in the bush to make sure the bear's gone. I know in retrospect, that doesn't seem like the greatest idea. Like, maybe this isn't the hike to do today. But I take the stick and I toss this stick, and as I'm throwing, there's like this snap, crackle, pop, and my wife's like, what just happened? And I was like, I dislocated my shoulder. She's like, no, are you sure? And I'm looking at I can see the top of this bone, like here, where my bicep should be. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I just dislocated my shoulder out in the wilderness. And I had to hike back into town, and then they're like, I'm sorry, we can't do anything. You need to go to an emergency room. It's like a 70-mile drive to Duluth to the emergency room. So the moral of the story is that I wish I could say that I did something badass and I defended my wife from the bear, and I put her in a headlock and I do whatever. I threw a stick, right? So that's why I'm in IT and not in some kind of construction trade or whatever, because keyboard's about as dangerous as I can handle. Yeah, so there you go. Now you know. The talk is detecting and preventing phishing attacks using spear phishing attacks using DNS. What I'm talking about really is the problem of typosquatting. So how many know what typosquatting is? Okay, most of you guys know what typosquatting is, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it. But what I am talking about specifically are the kinds of typosquatting that are intentionally misspelled domain names. So like saying Microsoft with a 0 instead of an O. There's also typosquatting like using hyphenated domain names, so you concatenate two words with a hyphen. Service-paypal.com or request-microsoft.com, something like that. We're not talking about that kind of typosquatting. We're talking about intentionally misspelled domain names. And why is it bad? How many people follow the Grug? Anyone? We've got a few people. All right. So he sent this out before I talked about this at DerbyCon, right before I went on. I was like, this is perfect. I have to have this. Typosquatting combined with phishing attacks is bad because if you send it, they will click it. I mean, it's absolutely true. And it's often difficult to spot, especially with a really well-crafted typographically or typo-squatted domain name. They look a lot like what they're intending to target. And to the untrained user, it looks the same. It looks a lot alike. And we'll see one that would even fool security professionals. And they click on it. Now the attackers got their credentials. They've got malware installed on their machine. There's all kind of badness that happen. So that's why it's bad. And that's why we're talking about it. motivations around typosquatting back in the day was more, we'll say, like financially motivated. You go to a domain name that looks like the company you're trying to get to, but you misspell it and you get ads, right? How many have done that? We've all done that. And all of a sudden, what's going on here? I got this page and, oh, I mistyped it. Well, they were delivering ads, and they generate revenue by doing that. Sometimes you can use that to drive traffic to a competitor's site if you're really devious. Like you have the store down the street, you register a domain name real similar to theirs, and then whenever someone mistypes it, they go to your site. Now you're depriving them of business. As things are wont to do with the internet, they kind of tend to get bad over time, right? So then we start seeing malware delivery. If you have a domain name that's very similar, let's say you could get a typosquatting variant of Gmail, like Gmail with 1 for the I. Imagine all the mail that you could receive by setting up a mail server and just grabbing mail for domains that people mistyped. That's, again, a kind of a typosquatting attack. But what I want to talk today specifically is about like spear phishing attacks against your organization. So we're going to look at some of that here. There's all kinds of different typosquatting. You have things like repeated characters, Google with 3 O's, or omitted characters, Amazon.com versus Amazon.com, swapping characters around, decfon.org versus defcon.org. Things like missing dots. So www.microsoft.com is a completely different domain than www.microsoft.com, right? You're going to go to different places. Making things singular or plural, apples versus apple.com. Homophones. Now that's one that's not particularly useful for this kind of attack because it's words that sound similar but are spelled differently. So depending on where you're at in the world, root and root sound the same. Some might say route and root, right? So, or I don't even know how else you say root, or like that's how I say it, but there's a different way to say root, right? Root, it's a root, I guess, root. So that's not particularly useful. It might be useful in a phishing attack where it's taking place over the phone, social engineering. Homoglyphs, that's one that's especially useful for what we're talking about today. Characters that look like other characters. Derby Khan with a 0 instead of an O. Gmail with a 1 instead of an I. Wrong TLD, whitehouse.gov versus whitehouse.com. Anyone made that mistake? Thank you for raising your hands, being with me. All right. So the wrong country code, evilcorp.cm versus evilcorp.com. That's one we're starting to see a lot of, right? Because CM and com, if you're not paying attention, but it's got a C and an M and a click away. There's a really interesting one called bit flipping. You can see there's like Facebook and FCC ebook. I'm not going to talk about that, but it deals with actually memory corruption that happens on a computer as a result of X-rays or heat or all kinds of things. And there was an interesting talk done at DEF CON a few years ago. If you're interested in hearing about bit flipping, I would definitely go take a look at that. You can do really cool things. One guy did an attack. Basically, he registered bit flipped variants of google.com, and he actually even received traffic from Google. Like, because of heat in their data centers causing these bit flips, he was receiving traffic from Google. So there's some badness there, but again, this is not really useful for what we're talking about here. So there's different kinds of typosquatting. The more traditional we're talking about, twatter.com is not Twitter, okay? One character off, but not the same. This one, teslamotors.com instead of teslamotors.com, and you can see, right there, search ads. This is an advertising site. This is generating ad revenue when people go to teslamotors.com. This one I thought was interesting. I just said, wonder what happened if I did this, and I went to Microsoft instead of Microsoft. And I bounced through a bunch of advertising networks and I ended up at store.hp.com. That's odd. So this next one, really, I thought, now this is really odd. Lowe's with a 0 took me to homedepot.com, right? So again, more traditional kinds of typosquatting, revenue generated types of attacks. But so the question is, are we actually seeing spear phishing attacks combined with typosquatting? And the answer is yes, absolutely we are. How many heard of Anthem and Premera getting breached earlier this year, right? Got a few people. Anthem and Premera, 2 large Blue Cross Blue Shield providers in the United States. And they were attacked. And after the analysis facts showed that, in fact, typosquatting-based domains were involved in spear phishing attacks. In the case of Anthem, they used to be known as wellpoint.com, or Wellpoint, and they still operate services under the wellpoint.com domain. When they did their after-action analysis, they found out that there was a spear phishing domain, we11point.com, that got registered, and that was the domain that was used to send the spear phish in. With Premera, it was Premera, 2 N's instead of an M. And in certain fonts, especially like in a browser or an email client, 2 N's looks a lot like an M. It's very hard to see unless you look at it closely. Like if you're just going, oh yeah, it looks like Premera.com, click, and you end up someplace else. So then we saw another one further, Care First, a large Blue Cross Blue Shield provider for the Washington, D.C. area. 2 domains were registered for that one, Care First with an L and Care First with a 1 in place of the I. So we are definitely seeing spear phishing attacks targeted at organizations combined with typo-squatted domain names. So I started thinking, you know, what could I do? My former employer was a Blue Cross Blue Shield company, and so I was like, what could we do to try to monitor for these kinds of attacks? Could we detect if they were going to happen? And I started looking for tools. There are some tools out there to help you. Oh wait, I have one more example. This is what happens when you forget what's coming next. Lloydsbank.co.uk is a big bank in the UK. Lloydsbank.co.uk. Who can tell me what is wrong with this here? Because that is not Lloyds Bank's domain. It's correct, neither of them are L's. And someone said capital I's. Those are capital I's, not lowercase L's. You send that to a trained security professional, and without copying that and pasting that into Notepad or something else that uses a different font, there is no way to tell that that's not lloydsbank.co.uk. If you were to put them side by side, it's a couple pixels heavier weighted for the capital I versus the lowercase L, right? So this would fool just about anyone. Lloydsbank.co.uk, like I looked at it and it took me a while to figure out what it was until I copied the text out and put it in Notepad, and then I was like, holy crap, that's devious. So how can we detect these kinds of things? There are some tools that we could use. URL Crazy, it's a tool written by Andrew Horton. It's a Ruby tool. It's been included in Kali and Backtrack for quite a while. And the way it works is you give it a domain name, and it uses various algorithms to generate glyphs, characters that look like other characters. Does that table of different kinds of typosquatting I showed you, it runs through a bunch of different variations and generates possible typosquatting alternatives for your supplied domain name, and returns that list for you. More recently, there's a tool called DNS Twist, written by Marcin Ulikowski, and this is, it's kind of funny because Marcin didn't even know that URL Crazy existed when he wrote DNS Twist, and when I was emailing him about it, and I asked him, like, were you intending to replace this tool? He's like, I haven't even heard of it. You know, he looked at it, he's like, wow, this does look the same. It's like exactly the same almost. It has more features now that are pretty cool, but at its base, you give it a domain name, it generates typosquatting alternatives for that domain. Now, both of these tools have one feature that we can use as defenders to detect these things. You know, in the case of URL Crazy, it was actually written as a tool more for pen testers, I believe, to generate a domain name that they could use when they want to target a client organization when they're doing a pen test. But both of these tools will tell you not only here's possible variations on your domain name, but they will tell you if a domain is registered or not. So we can use the fact that our domain is registered as kind of a canary to tell us whether or not the attack is going to happen. So it's manual. These are both point-in-time tools, meaning if you ran it today and you ran it a week from now, they tell you the results that existed at the time you run it. So you would have to collect the output and then manually compare it to see if there's any kind of difference between the two. And I wanted to know, was there a better way? And I couldn't find one. So I wrote a tool called Crazy Parser. And it's a Python program that is able to detect changes in iterations by kind of setting up a database file. And it will consume the output of both DNS twist and URL crazy. So we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to show you how it's configured, the options that are available, and show you a demo that works, hopefully. So right now, let's go take a look at that. Okay, so when you first download Crazy Parser, you're going to have several files. You can have Crazy Parser itself. You're going to have knowndomains.csv and mydomains.csv. So let's take a look at those files. So with mydomains.csv, that's just what it sounds like. It's my domains, the domains that I want to monitor for. When you first get it, it's going to have example.com. We're going to look at my domains, so dang it. Now, if you wanted to put another domain in there, you could. You just put in as many domains as you want, one per line. But we're just going to use one. I noticed I didn't spell Google right. Thanks for not mocking me. Okay, so look at this, make sure I spelled it right. hardwaterinformationsecurity.com. Okay, so that's my domain. I want to monitor for attacks against my domain. We also have a file called known domains. And what this is it's domains we've already seen. We've already identified as being registered typosquatting variants of our domain. You'll see that there's a header file, or header line, and then we have a domain, comma, and some text. And we'll talk about that later, but it's not important now. First time you run it, you can just delete these out of here. Now, to run Crazy Parser, it needs to know where DNS twist and URL crazy are located. So let's take a look at that. When you open this up, some comments at the beginning, it tells you what its dependencies are. And specifically, it talks about expecting URL crazy and DNS twist to be installed at a specific location. If they're not, right down below the imports is, there are two variables, URL crazy path and DNS twist path. You just update these variables to point to your installation, and that's all you need to do to start using this. So let's look at the command line options that are available. And if you run it without any options, it gives you a help menu. So you have -c or --config. That's the directory where those CSV files are located. It's going to assume it's the directory you're in unless you specify a different directory. In the case of -o or output, that is the output file that's going to be generated. Defaults to results.csv. -d is the directory where that output file will be stored. Again, it's going to default to the directory you run it from unless you specify something else. -m allows you to email the results to yourself rather than just dumping them to a file, and we'll take a look at the mail configuration. And then the last two are important, DNS twist and URL crazy. That tells Crazy Parser to use one or the other or both. You can use one or the other. I would encourage you to use both because there are differences in their algorithms they use to generate glyphs and what things they'll find. You get better coverage. In some domains, they'll return exactly the same thing, but for other domains, there are differences, so you get better coverage by using both. Let's take a look at the mail server configuration for a second. So there is a send mail function. And again, there's some comments here. It tells you what you need to do. You put a username and a password in, configure your mail server. Right here, username. It's set up to use Gmail, so right here you would use your account name. Your application-specific password would go here, and your recipients. If you're defining more than one recipient, you just set up a format like this. And then right down here is the mail server configuration. So it's set up to use Gmail. You could put your own mail server and port in here, and you could get set up. If you're not using Start TLS, you'll need to comment out this line, because otherwise it's going to try to do Start TLS and fail. So that's all you need to do at this point to be able to send mail for the output. What did I just do? All right, so let's run it and take a look at what actually happens. So we're going to run it and use both DNS twist and URL crazy. So what's happening here is Crazy Parser is reading the domain or domains that you've specified out of my domains. It's taking that information, it's passing it to both URL crazy and DNS twist. It's grabbing the results from that, and because known domains is empty, there's nothing to compare it to, so it's going to return all the results. Everything that it detected as being a registered domain, because remember, we're looking for registered domains. We don't want to know about domains that could exist, we only want to know about ones that do exist. So once it finishes running, we have results.csv, and you'll see that there are a number of domains here that apparently exist that are variants of my domain name. And we see a number of different variations of hardwaterinformationsecurity.com and then hardwaterinformationsecurity.net. So what you would do then is you would take this information and put it in knowndomains.csv, which I've already set one up. And you can see what the file looks like here. So I have all of those domains that results.csv contained, comma, and then some text. And this text is a comment that's used just for your resources, for your reference to look at and go, what does this mean? I typically use squatter and valid site. That's all I used with the company when I wrote this, the place I was working. But let's say you have some kind of ticketing system or incident tracking system and you want to capture the output, screenshots and other information about the domain that help you make a decision on whether or not this is a valid site or it's something that's targeting you. When I did the demo at DerbyCon, I used derbycon.com, and one of the domains that came back was derbyco.com. Very close to derbycon.com. Turns out it's Derby and Company. It's a valid business, so I marked that as a valid site. But with that ticketing system, you notice I have like a number there. You could just put your ticket number in, then go to grab your ticket system and refer to that. Or like the last line, it really doesn't matter. As long as you have comma and something there, the program's happy. It doesn't matter what's there. So once we have that, we can now run the program again. And what's happening here is that Crazy Parser is now running again, and it grabs the output from both URL crazy and DNS twist. Same thing it did before. But now because there's information in my domains, knowndomains.csv, it looks at that and it compares each result that it returned from the other tools against what's in knowndomains.csv. And if it exists, that tells Crazy Parser, hey, we've seen this before. We acknowledge that it exists and we've taken action on it. We don't want to see it anymore. So it gets suppressed from the output. And we'll take a look at the output when it finishes running here. Now, one thing that I didn't point out with knowndomains.csv, you notice I don't have, hardwaterinformationsecurity.net in here. And the reason is for this demo, we're going to assume that when we first ran Crazy Parser, this domain didn't exist. It wasn't registered. So when we built our known domains file, hardwaterinformationsecurity.net was just a possible typosquatting variation that didn't actually exist on the internet. So the next time we come back and run the program, if hardwaterinformationsecurity.net has been registered, then that should be the only thing that's in the results unless there are other domain variants that have been registered as well. So we ran that. It's not in knowndomains.csv, so let's look at results.csv. Yay, demo worked. All right. So now we see hardwaterinformationsecurity.net. So me as the owner of hardwaterinformationsecurity.com, my spidey senses should be tingling at this point. I'm going to go, whoa, why did someone register something that's exactly like my domain but with just a different TLD? And now I would start going to investigation and response mode. Speaking of that, when you're looking at these domains, if you're not an incident response kind of person, you might not know to do this, but I would definitely use a separate internet connection that's not connected to my company. Because if I'm trying to detect someone that may be spear phishing me, if I go and query their domain, hit their web servers from the IP associated with my company, I'm tipping my hand that, hey, I see you, I know you. So use a non-attributable machine, something that's not connected to your network, can't be tied back to you. I usually call these like dirty networks or dirty VLANs. It's something that goes out a separate internet connection. And you can go and research these and try to figure out, is this a valid site? Is this something that's just an ad revenue based site right now? Or holy crap, that's a clone of my website. If it's a clone of your website, you know that something bad has already happened or is about to happen. So that's it for the demo phase. So I have a few slides here to talk about what you would do once you've ran Crazy Parser the first time and you see these domains in here, and then every time you do afterwards. Actually, let's back up a second. So I ran it from the command line. That's kind of clunky to have to log in and do that every time. So I ran it out of cron. You'd want to run it probably at least once a day. You can run it more often to get better resolution. At some point, if you are monitoring for a large number of domains, the amount of time it takes for all the DNS queries to finish is longer than your iteration, your cron refresh rate. I did set it up so it won't clobber your files, your temp files, but you're going to run into a problem where it's taking longer to run, and you're going to have more and more processes running. So running it every 10 minutes probably isn't useful, but maybe once or twice a day might be good enough for you. So once you have these domains and you start investigating, it's time to do something to contain the problem in case there is one. So I have to have at least one funny cat picture in every talk, so there you go. That's your funny picture for today. What I did in the company I worked at, we just blocked it in the web proxy. If we saw a domain that was, even if it's just an advertising site, I don't know that at some point in the future it's not going to be delivering a malicious flash ad, or it's not going to get compromised and be used to target me. So I block that domain in the web proxy so my users can't get there. But you could also black hole DNS. That prevents any network access to that domain by returning like a localhost IP for those domains. So you could set that up in your DNS server and black hole those domains. And you can increase monitoring. You can look at your proxy logs and see, hey, there's clients trying to reach these sites. Do we have someone infected? Have they been spearphished? What's going on? You could look in your email server. If you see these domains that you've identified as a phishing site or an advertising site, and all of a sudden you see emails containing links to those sites, that should be a clear indicator that you probably have a spear phishing attack that's starting. You can also monitor your client DNS queries. If someone socially engineers someone over the phone and talks to them and gets them to go to one of these domains, you can see the DNS query. It might not see it in your email and you're not seeing it in your web proxy, but all of a sudden you have a client doing a DNS query for it. How did that happen? So do your whole, woo, yeah, I don't know what's going on down there, but someone's excited. So you monitor for your DNS queries, and you can see things happening that way. So this approach has its pluses and minuses. There are things it's going to detect, and there's things it's just not going to detect. Right now, it detected, well, when I wrote this tool, I had no problem detecting wellpoint.com as we11point.com. So had Anthem been using my tool, had it existed before the attack started, they would have seen this. I wanted to know, would this have given them a heads up? And in the case of Wellpoint, it did. The tool did return that. So they would have had an indicator that something was up, and they may have had a chance to respond and even prevent anything from happening. Premera, not so much. With Premera, neither DNS Twist nor URL Crazy detected it. I was able to write submit a pull request to Marcin for it, and now, since I added that, it does detect the double N glyph for an M. Care First was 50-50. It detected Care First with an L, but not Care First with a 1. But I did submit a pull request for that, so that is detected now in DNS Twist. And that's why I encourage you to use both tools, because for the Care First ones, URL Crazy didn't find it. And there are certain things that, even though they are typo-squatted variants and you look at how the glyphs are generated, it's not detecting them. I'm not a good enough programmer to look at that and go, why is this happening? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Like, I've even tried fixing it sometimes and it doesn't do it. And I'm working with both Andrew Horton and Marcin to continue to help improve that. I should say I'm working with them by being a public contributor and submitting pull requests. It's not like I'm actually part of a development team, right? But if you are interested in doing this, you could go to DNS Twist is being actively developed. You could go look at that code and submit pull requests, and Marcin will review those and include them. And I encourage you to do that. Get involved. Other things, like I mentioned at the beginning, it doesn't detect hyphenated domain names. Service-PayPal.com is a different kind of typosquatting that's not a misspelling. And these tools detect misspellings, so you're not going to see this. With the caveat that DNS Twist does detect certain variations where you take the whole domain name and insert a hyphen somewhere within the domain name, it will detect that, so you would see that. But won't see the kind where you take PayPal.com and then prepend service dash or easypay-paypal.com. You're not going to get that. And it doesn't detect or prevent damage to your external users and your customers, people who are outside your scope of DNS control. They're not going to be able to be protected by this because they're not using your DNS system. They're using public DNS, so you can't black hole them. They're not using your proxy, so you can't block them in the proxy. But you do have options. In the US, we have the, what is it called? The Anti-Cybersquatting Consumer Protection Act. Not particularly useful. I don't know that anyone's actually blocked a domain, but the law is there that you could do that. World Intellectual Property Organization has their Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Policy, UDRP. And you can actually go worldwide then and say, hey, this is someone that's either infringing on my brand and trying to profit on that, or this is someone who is maliciously trying to target me with spear phishing. If you can prove that, there's some documentation you have to provide. They will award you ownership of that domain, so that you can now black hole that domain. And we saw things like that with we11point.com. That domain's it's sinkholed now, right? You can't get to it. So they will award ownership of that domain. And ICANN has some resources. The link is there on the bottom. And if you don't capture it here, you can just tweet me or email me, and I will send you a copy of the slides. You can find this link. They have a PDF that talks about the steps that you need to take in order to document things from a legal perspective in case you're trying to do a domain name seizure from someone else that's targeting your domain. So with that, the code is out on GitHub. And it's a hardwaterhacker/crazy parser, and you can download and use it. If you do use it, I'd love to hear about it. If you like it, if you hate it, you're frustrated, you have questions, you can tweet to me. I'm hardwaterhacker. My email address is mike@hardwatersecurity.com. And I do blog occasionally, not very often, but I do things like post the slides, post links to the talks. If I write a new tool, I'll put it there. And that's hardwatersec.blogspot.com. So with that, see, I tried to take up some time, and we're almost back on schedule here. It's 3:25 or 3:24. So are there any questions? Back over there in the corner. Sure. So the question is, I said that you could seize the domain of someone who's targeting you, but the question is, could they flip the tables and say that you were the one that was actually targeting them and their legitimate domain name? Yeah, they could certainly try that, but if you're a legitimate business, you've got articles of incorporation, you've got domain name registry that you can point to that's existed before their domain existed. So you kind of have these things to prove that I am who I say I am. You prove who you are, and they can't because they just recently registered the domain and they're not operating a business. They don't have articles of incorporation, all that stuff. So they could try it and be a real pain in your can, but I don't think they'd be successful. There was a question right over there.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you talked about using the dirty net to actually go to the site if you want to do it, right? Would doing these actual DNS queries, as you're doing a lot of them, give yourself away potentially as well?
So the question is, I mentioned using a dirty network to do these queries and so you're not giving away something that's associated with your network. Would you be tipping your hand by doing these DNS queries? You possibly could be. Yes, absolutely. Like a determined adversary that's very threat aware is probably going to be looking for people doing reconnaissance, because there's probably not a lot of people doing reconnaissance on that domain. So any reconnaissance is tipping your hand. Doing it from something that's not attributable to you, using a VPN so you come from another part of the world where you're not doing business, might be something. I mean, that's kind of more like you start getting into OPSEC, that there's a whole other world out there that we could talk about. But yes, it could tip your hand. So the question is, does OpenDNS implement any of these kind of checks? I'm not sure. I know that they do provide some protections, but I can't tell you for sure whether or not they actually do this. I know that it costs a lot of money, but Domain Tools has a service that you can subscribe to that has a protection thing like this. So if you're a large corporation with deep pockets, you can use Domain Tools. I wrote this more for people that don't have the deep pockets.
One way to be a little more subtle with the reconnaissance would be to just query the name servers of the top level domain of the registry servers. And then you'll know if the name server is registered and that there's name servers for it.
Yes, so this gentleman pointed out that one way to be more stealthy when you're doing your reconnaissance and not tip your hand is to not query the domain directly. Just go directly to the root servers, the top level domain server, and to see if that domain exists. And they will tell you if it exists and who the authoritative domain name server is. But if you don't actually connect to their server, you're not going to tip their hand. You won't be able to see their web page because you're not trying to send any traffic to them, but you could see the domain existed. And that's what these tools are doing. I don't believe that URL Crazy or DNS Twist go directly to the domain that's in question, but I could be wrong. Any other questions? All right, well, welcome to BSides Winnipeg. If this is your first one, this is mine. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you.